Hi everyone. I just want to share with you something very interesting. And it's the fact that burnout isn't necessarily caused by overexertion or working too hard, but it's actually caused by working hard and not getting a sufficient reward for it. So, what I mean by that is that you put in a lot of time, a lot of effort into something, and the results you get from it are not worth the effort you put in. And the reason I mention this is because if you've been studying a lot and you've been studying for lots of hours and putting in a lot of effort but not getting the best results or the grades you think you deserve, then you are going to inevitably burn out and get even worse grades. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this, and I decided to look at all the scientific literature I could find from cognitive psychology and neuroscience to try to find the most optimal ways to study and also to integrate AI into making those techniques more efficient and effective. And what I found was shocking. So the techniques that are most intuitive to us are not actually the best for us. And I'll give you an example. If you have ever reread your notes, or if you highlighted your notes, or if you kept summarizing your notes, it might have felt productive at the time. You might have felt like you were putting in a lot of effort and time studying, but the results you were getting from those study techniques are actually low. And those are what psychologists call low utility study techniques. And so obviously I was shocked, as I've always used these techniques, but I was also curious, if I were to not use these techniques, what am I supposed to use? And consistently throughout the research, two techniques kept showing up: active recall and spaced repetition. Active recall is simply the act of retrieving information completely from your head without referencing any notes. And this kind of shifted my mindset about learning. So learning is no longer, for me, it's no longer about just putting information into your head. It's actually about retrieving information from your head after obviously like getting an initial reading of the material just so you could encode it. You just keep asking yourself questions, you keep testing yourself, and that's how you actually learn the information. And the reason this works is because although it will save you time, it's actually a very effortful technique. It's very cognitively demanding. And the science shows that whenever a technique is cognitively demanding, you have to actually use more brain power to study, then the information will stick for longer and you'll actually understand the information better. It's more durable learning, okay? And the best ways I found to integrate this, the first one is not even using AI, and it's to simply write inverted notes. So instead of writing the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, instead you should write, what is the mitochondria? And then in a later session, you can answer that question, and that actually triggers active recall because you're trying to retrieve that information from your head without looking at your notes. Obviously, after you answer the question, you should look at your notes to make sure you got it right. The second way I like to implement active recall is to use ChatGPT or any other software that's similar to it and to actually explain concepts to it. So the best way to learn about things, they always say, is to teach somebody else. And a lot of people teach, their siblings, their pets. And although that works, the problem is your siblings or your pets won't give you feedback on whether you were right or wrong, which might actually further reinforce like a negative belief you have of the material. Whereas like if you were to explain the concept to AI, it will actually tell you, the information is correct, or it will tell you, well, you said this even though it's inaccurate. So it'll correct you right there and then. The second technique is called spaced repetition, and it's basically the opposite of cramming. So you want to spread out your study sessions over time. Now, this feels very intuitive, and we've all been warned to not cram before a test by parents or teachers. But the reason that not many of us actually utilize this is because the execution of this technique is very nuanced. And basically, it all comes from the intervals in which we want to review. So, if I'm going to review a topic today, let's say I review chapter 1 in biology today, I'd want to review it tomorrow, and then 3 days from then, and then 1 week from then, and then 2 weeks from then. So if you notice, the intervals are actually always increasing, as opposed to just doing it, every other day or once a week. It's not a constant interval; it's an increasing interval. And this seems counterproductive because, of course, you're doing less revisions. But the reason this works is because it's actually harder for your brain to remember when you're just about to forget the information. And the intervals that I mentioned, and I said they're nuanced, is because they're based on this forgetting curve. I'll show you here. So basically, the way our brain works, it forgets information exponentially. Now, this seems kind of scary, but when you actually look at this here, it shows that by interrupting the forgetting curve, you can retain a lot more information over time. So each one of these is actually a review session, and so by the end you're forgetting information a lot slower and you're retaining a lot more information. Anyways, so the forgetting curve, when you're actually reviewing and interrupting it, that's when you remember more information. And I found that there's a couple ways to use this, but my favorite is to use digital flashcards. And the reason for this is because, first of all, they do incorporate active recall like we talked about earlier. But they also have a space repetition AI system. So apps like Quizlet, Anki, Remnote is one of my favorites. They have this like system where if you get a card right, it would resurface that card. Like there's an AI algorithm doing this for you. It will resurface that card at a later session. Whereas if you get a card wrong, it will resurface it sooner. So that you're always challenging your brain and that you're not wasting time on flashcards that you already know. And then this way you could just focus on, actively recalling the information without having to worry about, the space repetition science that I talked about, because this already optimizes it for you. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening.